Welcome back from a maybe long break for some of you, maybe too short for some of you. Whatever the case may be, you're here and I appreciate that. Here we go. So we were working inside of module 2 when we left. And the last thing to do in that module was this check on learning, and that is due today. So those of you that have not done that module 1 and 2 check on learning, that is due today. And you go into announcements and you go to the week 2, sorry, because that's a module 2 thing. The week 2 newsletter. There are notes that I highly recommend you use. That check on learning is a summative assignment, and our class has 3 types of assignments: formative, 20% of your grade; participation is 10%. And then summatives, like this check on learning here, which is due January 4th, that's 70% of your grade, right? So if you haven't done it yet, it'll be a big hit on your grade when I put that into the grade book, probably tomorrow. So we are in module 3, and here is our overview, our to-do list this week. We have some lexicon to do. I'm gonna go through and do that with you. And then we're going to talk about how to use Lightroom on your iPad to shoot and organize your photos. So this week we will have an introduction photo shoot where you go out and you take 15 photos of stuff, anything. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm not telling you to go take pictures of leaves, go take pictures of pets, what you take a picture of, totally up to you. Doesn't matter. You just have to take 15 to 30 using Lightroom. And I'm going to go through how Lightroom works today. And then we'll have a discussion about that intro photo shoot, and you'll have a module 3 check on learning where you'll hopefully score a 7 or better. All right. In module 2, we talked about the exposure triangle. So who can remember what the exposure triangle consists of without me going to a page that shows it? 3 parts. Go for it.
It's the shutter speed, the aperture mode, and the ISO.
Yep, so shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Those 3 things combined create the exposure for our image. And each one of those has like a technical thing that it controls and a creative thing. Technical side, all 3 of them control the same thing, and that is light. But creatively, what can shutter speed do for us in regards to blur?
Make things look in motion.
Make things appear to be in motion. Yeah, motion blur. Absolutely, motion blur. So, a slower shutter speed, things will be blurrier. A faster shutter speed, there won't be blurred. So when you wave your hand at different speeds, it might just appear to be frozen there, or it'll just be like almost not there at all, super blurry. And then aperture. Aperture is a whole nother different type of blur. Who remembers that one?
Okay. The aperture does basically the focus on somebody, whether it's focused on just one thing or everything's in focus. So it makes it can make the black background blurry of an object, I guess. Right?
Absolutely. It's that depth of field. And so when the background has all that blur, it's really shallow, right? So like objects in the foreground might be really blurry and things in the background might be really blurry. That'll be a shallow depth of field. Cool. So the aperture does that for us. And here's where things get difficult switching to the iPad. But let's go to the next page. So before I go to the next page, this week the assignments are an intro photo shoot, piece of cake, I promise. A little discussion about it, and then a check on learning. However, we're still going to do our lexicon and all that stuff. But before I do this lexicon, I want to get to what I was hinting at about aperture and why it's difficult when converting to the iPad. Let me see where it's at in here. So we talked about, we know shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. skip that. Aha. On the iPad, you cannot control the aperture. So instead, we use these two things. And really, it's mostly just this one. The focus distance slider. So on the iPad, we do not have an aperture. There is an aperture on that lens, but we don't control it in the same manner. So instead, we use the focus distance slider. And you're going to see what that looks like today. I'm going to go through and do a whole, go through the whole app and show you how it all works. But there is no aperture in the iPad. Instead, we use the focus distance slider. So I'm going to go to the previous page and let's knock out this lexicon. All right, and the way to do that is, at a minimum, highlight it all, copy it, stop that share, start a new share. There we go. All right, and under Photo 1, Lexicon, Trimester 2, that was all the stuff from week 1, week 2. And so I had made a spot for week 3 in my notes. So I'll go here, I'll press Command V, or for you on an iPad, you'll just hold there until paste pops up. Paste that in there, and now we have our words. So again, whenever you take the final or any exam, or you're just wondering, right, you can go into notes and search. Let's say you wanted to know about focus peaking. You type in peaking, it highlights it for you, and you can jump straight to that word, right? So we're gonna have this long running notes. And just in case, to be ready for next week, I'll go ahead and type week 4. So that's ready. So we just join. Oh, there we go. Okay, so if you want, you can hop over, to Canvas, copy and paste while I talk about what these things are. So white balance. White balance is a process of removing unrealistic color casts so that objects which appear white in person appear white in your photo. So you can change it to where maybe your photo is more orange or warmer, a lot more orange, or you can make it to where it's a little bit more blue or colder, right? And you can change all that using what's called white balance. But the point of white balance is to make it so that your picture, anything that should be a certain tone or shade of white in your photo or in person, it looks the same in your photo. White balance is what fixes that. Kelvin. Kelvin represents the temperature of light, directly correlated with the color of carbon burning at that temperature. So light is measured in Kelvin, right? So we have temperature, which is Fahrenheit or Celsius. Well, we also have a thing called Kelvin, and that's what light is measured in. And you can manually set your camera to be a certain Kelvin of light, which affects your white balance. So you can make it a warmer Kelvin, like 2000 Kelvin would be very, very orange, or 8000 Kelvin, which would be very, very blue. But Kelvin is what we measure light in. Clipping. Clipping. This happens when you have areas with no information in your photo. When an area has no information, it is either pure white, so a clipped highlight, or it is pure black, so clipped shadows. So there will be no detail on that object. If you take a picture and it's just way overexposed and certain bright spots are clipped, there will be no information there, no detail, no texture. It'll just be pure white. If you were to print it, it wouldn't put anything there. It would just stay white. Same thing for shadows. If it's clipped, it'll just be like pure black ink when you print it. It won't show any detail. So if you're wearing a black hoodie and you take a photo and the shadows are clipped, right? There's clipping in the shadows. You won't see the texture of the hoodie. It'll just be pure black. And then where the clipping ends, there might be a hard line where texture starts again. And so you generally want to avoid clipping. And the way to avoid clipping is using that shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. So clipping means there's no information there, and it's going to clip to be either pure white or pure black. Exposure compensation. So you kind of want to avoid using this, but exposure compensation allows photographers to override exposure settings picked by a camera's light meter in order to darken or brighten images before they are captured. So you can use exposure compensation to make the image brighter or darker, but we generally try to just do that with our shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. And then we have a thing called focus peaking. Focus peaking is a focusing aid in live preview or inside of electronic viewfinders, like in the viewfinder of a camera that you can, put your eye up to, that will put a highlighted color around the edges of things that are in focus. And on your iPad, it's going to be a neon green color, but many cameras will let you change what color that is. And actually, lots of cameras don't even have it, like zero focusing aids at all, no focus peaking. And so it's nice that iPad Lightroom provides that to us. And you're going to see what that looks like today. So there's our lexicon words out of the way. If you're someone who is doing flashcards, awesome, right? Here's the words, add them to it, go through it, and get them memorized. But at a minimum, you need to have a running list of notes so you can search, know where to find the information. Because at this point, we're at a lot of words, 14, 21, 20, 26 words so far. Not too bad. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing this screen unless someone has questions about the lexicon, our weekly lexicon. Cool. Let's go back to, is this our Canvas page? Yep, there it is. All right, so again, this is where we get those lexicon words from. If you just joined, please type here into the chat window so that way I get your attendance taken care of later on. All right, so this is the page that has the information, right? This is the lesson, as it were. So if you miss something, you forget something, I am going to take this, Zoom session, turn it into a video, but you could also go through here and read. And before I share my iPad screen, let's look at this page. This is what Lightroom on your iPad or your mobile device looks like. And so if you're looking at this, wondering what buttons or what, this diagram tells you. So if I were to go, let's say, what is this 4 to 3? And I follow the line, it says C, right? C. So I come down here and I find A, B, C. C is crop ratio options, right? So if you're just wondering what button is what, this tells you. What is EXP? What is that? So I go to Q. Q is exposure compensation. That's where my exposure compensation, which is a word we just learned, right? It allows you to make the photo brighter or darker after you've already set your other exposure settings, right? So this is a nice handy diagram for those of you that are visual learners. You like to see it, that exists for you. While I get the other screen started, if you have questions, now's a great time to ask them. Here is Lightroom on the iPad. And of course, it wants to access my camera, so I'm going to say okay to that. And there it is. I'll go ahead and allow it to use my location. Totally up to you. All right, in the bottom left corner here, where it says auto, we're going to switch it to professional, right? This is the equivalent of moving to manual mode, right? So that way we take all the guesswork away from the camera and we create the photo that we want. And now we have all of these options here. So I'll start in the top right corner where these 3 dots are. The top right corner, these 3 dots here. So this 4 to 3 is our aspect ratio. And we can change this before we even take the photo to be, maybe you want it to be a square. I leave it in 4 to 3 because that uses the entirety of this sensor, which is important. When our sensor is this small, we want to use as much of it as possible. And then if we want to crop it after the fact, we can. So I'll leave that at 4 to 3. The next button over is a timer, right? You can tell it 2 seconds. And in the bottom here, you can see that my shutter release button, the button you press to take a picture, has a 2 in it. So when I press that, 2 seconds later, it'll take a photo. And you can set that to 5 or 10. And this can be pretty useful if you're at a really slow shutter speed and just the mere pressing of it, right, moves the image, just pressing the button. Well, if you set the timer and have it set on something stable, then you can tap that button, let go, and 10 seconds later, when it's nice and still, it'll take the photo for you. But I'm going to leave mine set to off. However, the timer exists. Don't be afraid to use it. This grid and level. There are options for different grids. This one in the middle is the one we are going to use. This is thirds, for rule of thirds. And we're going to have a photo shoot later on that specifically surrounds rule of thirds. So I'll leave that on this center grid there. You can have a level as well. And if I'm off, right, you can see that it's telling me to go this way until that line turns yellow. If I go this way, come back, now I know it's level. There's also a dot there that tells you if you are off from the horizon. So now I'm level, and that's just creepy looking. But there we go. You can get all of them to be yellow. It's exactly level. It's a nice guide. I don't use the level personally, I just use the grid. So I'm going to turn the level off. This next one over is going to show highlight clipping. And you can see in the bottom left corner there, I have what we call zebra stripes, a zebra striping pattern. And it's telling me that area is overexposed. It is clipping. So if I were to print it, it's just going to be pure white, right? There will be no detail there, no information. So it's letting me know you need to do something to bring it back, right? And if I come all the way over here, look at all that clipping that's going on, right? So that's a good example of seeing what clipping will look like on your screen for you. So I like to have clipping turned on. If I go into settings, I like to use max screen brightness because the brightness of the screen, if it's really dark, you might think, oh, my photo is way too dark, and now you start to overexpose. So I like to make sure that my screen brightness is really high. And then if you want to, you can turn on or off geotagging the photos. Geotagging will put information inside the picture that it's a thing called EXIF data, EXIF. And somebody could go into the photo, find the EXIF data, and tell you right where that photo is taken with lat-long coordinates, right? We can look up exactly where that photo was taken. So you can turn that off or turn it on, it's up to you. And the 3 dots again will move those options out of the way so it's not on the screen when you are trying to compose your photo. So let's go to the bottom left here where it says EXP. EXP, this is exposure compensation. And so it usually gives you around 3 stops to make it brighter or darker. I tend to leave mine in the middle. And let's say I had it over there, I'm having a hard time getting it back to the middle. I can press this twice and it'll zero it out. And so now it's back to 0. I leave mine at 0. All right, SEC. This is our shutter speed, seconds, right? We know our shutter speed is a fraction of some sort of second or whole seconds. And I can make it faster by sliding it here, and you can see the image gets darker. And I can make it slower, right? So I'll have a lot more motion blur and a much brighter photo. I'll have a lot less motion blur over here and a much darker photo. So there's your shutter speed control on Lightroom on an iPad. Our next one over is ISO. And if you look at my image right now, you can see all kinds of noise. It is very noisy. This is why our rule is to keep your ISO as low as possible. So we know that making it a bigger number will make it brighter, but it also makes it noisy. So I'll move that down here. And I can have a slower shutter speed to bring in light. So there we go. Now I have more light and far less noise. We just talked about this one today, white balance, WB. You can leave it in AWB, auto white balance, but there are other things you can experiment with. Tungsten, fluorescent lights, daylight. If you're outside and it's sunny, you can use that setting. If you're outside and it's cloudy, you can use that setting. And you can see that it's changing it to either be more orange or more blue, right? Or you can just let it be in auto. Our next slider, where it has brackets with a plus sign in it and it says auto right now, this is our focus distance slider. So let me get something to focus on here. Let's focus on this mouse. And if I move the slider, you can see these neon green lines around that mouse. That tells me that area is in focus. So we use this to control our focus. Now you can see that the blanket in the back is what's in focus, and the mouse is a little bit. I'm gonna cover my camera so you don't get dizzy. I'm gonna move around a little bit. Let's do, so I'll focus on this iPhone. All right, so it's very helpful to, this is the lens down here that I'm covering, to set that lens close to your subject. So if this is my subject, I'm gonna bring my lens really nice and close to it. I have a background that's far away, and we can see that I have, what do those zebras mean? Those zebra stripe patterns. Who remembers? Maybe I should open my chat window. All right, what is that zebra stripe pattern telling me about those highlighted areas? Clipping. Yep, so I can speed my shutter up a little bit. There we go, so now my exposure is better. I go to the focus distance slider, which is this one in yellow here. If I move the slider, I can see the focus changing, right? So right now it's on the end of that, whatever the MagSafe thing, that white ring. As I move it further over, now it's moved to the cameras. And as I keep going, it's moved further back to that MacBook that's there. And I'll keep going, and it's somewhere in the background. It's a little darker back there, so the lines don't show up. So this is how you set your focus. So if I wanted to take a picture of this iPhone, just those cameras, I would use this focus distance slider to get all those neon green lights there. And you can see that the background has some blur to it, right? The further away the background is, the more blur it's gonna have. The further away the background, the more blur it will have. And the closer you are to your subject, so now I have even more blur back there. So this is the only way we can really control our depth of field using Lightroom on the iPad. So when we're looking at it for our shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, this right here, SEC, would be the shutter speed. Slower is gonna make it brighter. Faster is gonna make it darker. Our ISO, which we wanna leave, small number, but it will make it brighter. But you can see, especially in the shadows, in the background there, we have a lot of noise. So we want to leave that number as low as possible. And then our aperture, instead we use a focus distance slider. Then from there, to take the photo, you just hit this button in the middle here, that white button, the circle there. Now I have a photo of my lenses on the back of my iPad. All right, I'm going to turn this, cover it so you don't get people all dizzy. There's also an option here in the top right that says JPG. JPG. Oh, let me close this. Reset everything. All right. JPG. Those of you who are using this on your mobile phones will likely be able to press on that and change it to say DNG, Delta November Golf, a DNG file. Week 1 lexicon, I believe, it could be week 2. Is there anyone who remembers what that would be? A DNG file. This is a JPEG. What's a DNG file? I'll give a few seconds for somebody to try to remember, and if no one does, that's okay. But you know where to find the information. So maybe one of you will pull your notes up, search, type DNG. All right.
An uncompressed file.
There you go. It is uncompressed. So right now I'm shooting JPEGs, and that's all that this iPad that the school, has given me. That's all that this iPad will shoot. But if I change it to DNG, I can then shoot uncompressed files. So those of you using your mobile cameras that are on your iPhones and things like that, you want to shoot those raw uncompressed files, or DNG, digital negatives, because then you can edit it a lot more. That is all of the settings on the camera portion of the Lightroom for iPad app. One last thing you can do is bottom right corner. Let's say you want the photo to be black and white before you even edit it. You could go in here and choose one of these presets. Right, so there are presets to give it a look before you've even gone in and done any sort of editing. I'm going to turn the presets off on mine. Any questions before I show how to organize photos? Nothing. Okay. The more you use that, the more you take time to experiment with it, the better you're going to get at using it. So I'll go over to Canvas and I'm going to look at my assignment now. And your assignment is this intro photo shoot. Let's see what it says. Take a couple of days, focus on experimenting with shutter speed, ISO, focus distance, and white balance. I wouldn't mess with exposure compensation because usually it won't let you use it once you go into like changing your shutter speed manually. Utilize the organization options in Lightroom for iPad as outlined in this lesson that I'm going to give, but there's also a video here, right, embedded already that tells you how to do all this. But we're going to take 15 to 30 photos. Create an intro folder, and in that folder, create a photo shoot and photo edit album. So it says to create an intro folder, and in that folder, create a photo shoot and photo edit album. After making all of your photos, you're going to take a screenshot. That screenshot should have a minimum of 15 photos, and that's what you're going to turn in here. So let me show you what that looks like. I'll go back into Lightroom. All right, here where it says albums, even though it says albums, this is where we're going to create our folder. Okay, and there's a plus sign next to it. Click the plus sign, and we want to create a new folder. And after a couple times of doing this, you'll get the hang of it. But there were students who chose not to do this, and then by week 9, week 10, they were like, dang, I really need to be doing the folders albums thing. It really helps. This is a career-oriented course, right? So keeping your stuff organized is going to be really important when you have multiple clients. You don't want to lose someone's photos or give someone the wrong photos, things like that. So you'll create a folder. We'll call it intro. there's that folder. It is now here. I'll go into that folder and create an album. You can press the blue button that says create album or the plus sign up here and create a new album. So we have an intro photo shoot. And in our next module, next week, you're going to have your intro photo edit. So we'll create another album inside this folder and we'll call that photo edit. Okay. So we just created a new folder, and within that folder created 2 albums. So now I need to take 15 photos minimum, where I learn what's happening with these settings, right? My exposure settings, my ISO, and my focus distance slider, right? So you've got to go out and do that. But I'm just going to snap a few photos so I can have some in here for this next example. All right, so let's say this is 15 to 30 images that I just took. And so there, let's see, I took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I took 6 images. Here's how we get them organized. So we only have to take 15. That's correct. You only have to take 15 pictures. And what you take pictures of is completely irrelevant, as long as they're school appropriate. But I am going to give some advice and some tips before you go out just taking random pictures. I'm going to give you a little bit of advice on it, a little bit of focus. But I need to get these images over to my intro photo shoot album, right? This album is empty. Add photos from your all photos collection or import new ones. Well, I'm going to go into the LR camera photos collection. In the top right corner, there are these 3 buttons, and I want to select. So I'm going to select those images. And what do I want to do with them? Well, I want to add them to my intro photo shoot album. So in the bottom here, it says add to. Right, so I selected them. Now I'm going to add them to my intro photo shoot. Right, I'll do that again. The whole thing. So I go here to LR camera photos after I've taken my pictures. Top right corner, there's 3 dots. I'll click select. I can either click on them individually, like maybe because that's a repeat. Maybe I don't want to add that one. Whatever the case may be, I'm just going to grab them all and I'm going to click add to my intro photo shoot album. So in the top right corner where it says add, we'll click add. And now if I go to intro photo shoot, there they are. So let's say this was all of my photos. At this point, you take a screenshot by holding the home button and the power button at the same time. And this screenshot is what you would turn in on Canvas to the intro photo shoot assignment. Piece of cake, bowl of ice cream, whatever you prefer. And that's going to be in your iPad camera roll. There it is. There we go. Right, so this is what you would turn in, this image here. This is photo 2. All right. So that's for the intro photo shoot assignment. Any questions about that intro photo shoot assignment? I use my Canon camera, absolutely, and I can talk about using those kinds of cameras after this. So 15 to 30 photos in Lightroom, put them in that intro folder, photo shoot album, take a screenshot of it, and you turn that in. Your screenshot might not show all of the images there, right? It might only show, 10, 11, 12 of them. That's okay, as long as you follow the example that I gave. Next to it, there will be a number that says, however many photos you've taken, and so I'll be able to see that. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. If we screenshot everything in one picture, won't it not be in detail? Right, and so I'm not looking at, I'm not looking like really in depth at detail, like quality of the images right now. Right now, it's just about learning how to manage the exposure triangle on the iPad in Lightroom and organize the photos. In the coming weeks, we're going to start having assignments, especially the last half of this whole class, this whole course. I think weeks 8 through 12 is nothing but every week, photo shoot, photo edit, photo shoot, photo edit. And that's when we start really looking at quality. This first one is for you to experiment, right? Take a picture of a thing, change the ISO, and see what happens to the quality of the image. Take a picture of a thing, change the shutter speed, see what happens. Put the lens close to stuff, move it further away, right? This is about experimenting. So don't just snap photos, try to do some experimenting. So this whole page we just went through basically, right? There's clipping, all those lines, you know what that is now. The diagram from shutter speed, right, exists in here and shows you where it is on that Lightroom for iPad app. Right, so the faster one without motion blur, darker, slower, lots of motion blur, brighter. Same for ISO, and then focus distance. We do not have an aperture. Instead, we use our focus distance slider. Exposure compensation does exist in there. We talked about Kelvin, right? So 2000 Kelvin here is going to be warmer, right? That's about equal to a sunrise as far as the color of light goes. It's going to be warmer than 8000 Kelvin, right? Which is really blue here. And if you were in the shade in fresh air, this might be what light is going to look like. So here's a nice diagram that shows you what is that in Kelvin of light? Well, it changes the color of the light, and we measure it in that scale of Kelvin. And this affects our white balance. There's a video again on how to shoot and organize everything I just went through. A video exists here. I'm going to take this one and make another video just in case. And now we have, right, red check mark self-reflections. Red check mark self-reflections. These are verbatim the questions that are going to be on the check on learning, which there is one at the end of this week. So I'm going to copy. I'm going to go into my notes. I'm going to find where I'm saving all my reflections, Photo 1 reflections, trimester 2. So I can see I have my module 2 aperture priority 1, module 2 manual mode. So now I need to make module 3. And I'm going to paste them in here. And now I will answer these. So this first set is review, and then everything under new. These are new questions. All right, let's review. Which F number will allow more light to reach the camera sensor, an f1.8 or an f22? And if you're, right, these are in here somewhere because they're review, so we know we've done these before, which means you can scroll up and find it. Which F number will allow more light to reach the camera sensor? We're talking about aperture, right? An F value.
1.8.
Absolutely. F1.8. It's going to be wide open aperture, lots of light coming in. Oops. And shallow depth of field at the same time. Oh, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Which F number will give a shallower depth of field? So lots of blur in the front and blur in the back. F1.8 or F22?
1.8.
Yep, F1.8. When using aperture priority mode, right? On a DSLR, we have these different mode dials, M, AV, TV, or A and S. When we're using the one that's aperture priority, what are you in control of? What is the camera in control of?
You're in control of aperture, and the camera is in control of ISO and shutters.
Nailed it. Yep. And if I go too fast for somebody, hopefully you can see the answers on the screen still. I'm trying to highlight them as I go. Don't hesitate to slow me down. Which shutter speed is going to keep light from reaching the sensor? So a darker image. Which shutter speed will give you a darker image? One-eighth of a second or 1/1000th of a second?
1/1000.
Absolutely. All right, we're almost done with review. Which of these shutter speeds will allow motion to blur? Lots of motion blur.
1/8.
1/8. Yep. Nailed it. It's going to give us all kinds of motion blur. And so what are the three parts of the exposure triangle? We've done that one quite a lot. What are the three parts of the exposure triangle?
Aperture, shutter speed, and ISO.
Yep, aperture, shutter speed. And ISO. There you go. So now we are getting into new stuff. This week's. What is the color temperature of light measured in? Is it measured in Fahrenheit, Celsius, or Kelvin?
Kelvin.
Kelvin. So that was a whole new measurement system that you know about. Which color temperature of light is warmer? 2000 Kelvin or 6000 Kelvin? And you might not remember, so I'm going to stop sharing that screen and I'm going to go here. All right, we have this. There it is. Under our white balance options, we have this diagram here that tells us, you know, which one's warmer, 2000 Kelvin or 6000 Kelvin. So looking at that, who's got it?
2000.
Yeah, 2000 Kelvin is warmer, right? Or at least more orange. For the majority of people, they would say this appears to be warmer and this appears to be colder, right? You can also affect the feeling that your photo will give to a viewer, right? The viewer might look at a photo that has lots of this color and say, this feels really warm. Or look at this one and say, it's really cold or moody. So which color temperature light is warmer? 2000 Kelvin is going to be warmer. Okay. What is the name of the process of removing unrealistic color casts so that objects which appear white in person appear to be white in your photo? What was that called?
White balance.
Yep, white balance. And if you were someone who was struggling to find it, right, I could go into, if I did my notes already, I could go up here, I can take part of this and say, color casts, what's that about? I type in color casts into the search, go to my lexicon, I can see that white balance here. White balance is the process of removing unrealistic color casts. What mode should you shoot photos in when using the Lightroom for iPad app? There's two options. Oh, go ahead. Say it again.
Professional.
Yeah. So you could put pro or professional, right? So there's only two options, auto or professional, automatic or pro. And we want to shoot in professional. That way we are completely in control of what our image looks like. Which exposure compensation value will make your photo brighter, -2 or +2?
+2.
Yep. I think even if you didn't go in and like look and move it, intuitively we could think, well, plus is brighter would be more, so plus probably. So yeah, +2. And they're usually in, golly, this is not working with me right now. Usually you can do up to ±3. Quite a few cameras will do ±5 now. On the iPad, we have ±3. What does that zebra stripe overlay on the live view of your photo mean for your exposure? When we see those zebra stripes over those bright spots, what does that mean? What's happening?
Clipping.
Clipping. That means we have clipping. And so basically that means our exposure, or we are overexposed. We are overexposing. It's too bright. Which part of the exposure triangle is not available to you in the Lightroom for iPad app? Aperture, right? There's no, we don't control the aperture in the same way. So what two controls do you use instead of aperture?
ISO and shutter speed.
Those are two parts of the shutter speed or the exposure triangle that are available to us. Those are there, absolutely. But instead of aperture, because there's no like aperture slider on that Lightroom for iPad app, what other sliders are there that we can use that give us a similar effect, technically and creatively? Technically being light, creative being blur. We'll give one letter of one of them, see if that helps.
It's the focus thing. I don't care what it's called, but it's the focus thing.
Yeah, the focus thing. It's called a focus distance slider. Yeah, so the focus distance slider, which is the brackets with a plus sign, right? That little button down there at the bottom. So we have a focus distance slider, and depending on some other settings, but usually you're not going to use this one, exposure compensation. So if our aperture would normally give us light to control light and blur, these are the same things. Focus distance slider helps us control where the blur exists or where it's in focus. And exposure compensation can help us get more light or less light. All right, so that is all of that. So whatever our next one is, I'll just make a space for it here. These questions could potentially be on the final and your module 3 check on learning, which is due Friday. If you need to, you could take a screenshot of this right now. I think all of module 3 is showing in here. I think I answered all the questions. Are there any questions about the questions, about this review, this self-reflection? Doesn't look like it. Cool. So, our list is getting longer, but hopefully you're doing this so you can just look in these two places along with Canvas, but you can just jump to your notes page to be able to search for information and find it. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing my reflections page here. I'm gonna go back to our canvas and we're almost done. So here's the assignment that I essentially completed, right? You go in, you create an intro folder. In that folder, you create a photo shoot and a photo edit album. You use Lightroom to take 15 to 30 photos, experimenting, seeing what happens with your shutter speed, your ISO, and your focus distance slider. Try having the lens, really low and close to things with a background that's far away, and switch that up, right? Once you have all those photos done, you select them and add them to your intro photo shoot album. You take a screenshot of that and you turn that in here. There is a video that explains how to do that. I think this is a video that I made during the spring of last year, right? When this whole transition to remote learning started. You'll see self-reflections with these, little thought bubbles. These are for you. These are just for you, while you're shooting if you want to. There's no requirement where I want you to at least do the notes page. But hopefully those of you who are really into photography, you'll do this. Or at least you'll think about it while you're taking your photos. This one, however, you're going to have to do anyways because it's part of the discussion, which I am going to briefly show. So at some point we have this discussion to work on and I'll reintroduce it the next time we Zoom. So the focus right now is this intro photo shoot. All three of these are due by January 11th. When we meet again, I'm going to participate in the discussion and I'll give you time to do the check on learning, right? So maybe you haven't finished your photo shoot yet. You'll at least have time to, for sure, on Thursday, take the check on learning. That is it. Enjoy. Have fun taking pictures. Make it an enjoyable thing.